everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today to start my October reading wrap up. The pace of reading in October has been rather slow for me, but I do have 2 books to wrap up for you today. The first one that I finished was my audiobook, which was called Ejaculate, Responsibly by Gabrielle Blair. And this is a really short audiobook that is read by the author. And she explains at the beginning of the book that she started, the book began as an essay, and that she expanded that essay into a book. And I'm so glad that she did. This book is so important on so many levels. It's really actually challenging to articulate that for me. But I think if you are raising children, who will become at some point sexually active, this is a very important book for you to read. And that is because her whole premise is taking the responsibility for pregnancy off of women and placing it squarely on men. And that is because men are 50 times more fertile than women. Women can get pregnant for only 24 hours in a month, whereas men can impregnate women 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from the time they hit puberty until they die. And therefore they are much more capable of causing unplanned pregnancy. And she goes through a lot of facts, so she kind of lays out her arguments in numbers and creates notes that go along with some of those. You can tell that she researched this meticulously. The book is very much based in a United States perspective, but I don't think that makes it unrelatable for people from around the world, because I think a lot of the attitudes that create unwanted pregnancies are prevalent across multiple cultures. Some of the things that you learn in this book are infuriating, especially when you're talking about data, statistics, and the origins of certain medical developments, such as the birth control pill and why it was designed the way it was, and why Viagra became Viagra was also a very interesting story. So I felt as a mother whose sons are teenagers now and will become sexually active in the next few years, potentially, that I needed to be well informed about what their role is to be a responsible human being in a sexual relationship, in a consensual sexual relationship. And one of those things is to learn the most safe and foolproof method to prevent pregnancy when having a sexual relationship with a partner. And that is very much for me as a parent, I feel part of my role, part of my job, to educate them and to be calm and well-informed, and to offer them clear science-based research and data about the best ways to support their partners and to avoid an unwanted pregnancy. And so that is what this book does. It was brilliantly done. I would highly recommend it. And I think that it is time that our culture stopped blaming women and their desire to have sex on unwanted pregnancies, when men are the ones who have the most control in these situations. Okay. And so the second book that I finished was The River Midnight by Lilian Nattel. So I really enjoyed this book, and it's historical fiction to me, kind of at its best. I don't know if everyone else would feel that way about it though. And so I feel on one hand this sense of like wanting to sing this book's praises, but I also feel like there were certain aspects of this story that are just very much specific to my personality, and I don't necessarily think that everyone would have the same reaction that I did. So this story is told in a very allegorical, poetic way, and it is the story of a shtetl, which was the name for Jewish villages, Jewish towns that were set up, I believe, kind of specifically by governments that were trying to control Jewish people and keep them congregated in certain areas. This is set in Poland, just at the end of the 1800s. Shuttles no longer exist. They have been annihilated. If you think about Jewish culture in Europe, and the Second World War, and etc., you know that there's a lot of history of Jewish people being displaced, and shuttles were part of the things that were basically destroyed during the Second World War across Europe. So Lilian Nattel did very extensive research to understand the culture and the structure of Jewish towns, and she recreated one here, a fictional one, with 4 women at its center, who were these young, kind of wild and carefree women. And the town is settled by a river. And the river is very important to the whole town. It's very important to the women. It represents so much, it has so much symbolism in the story. So I loved that. There's a lot of nature, a lot of beautiful nature. There's some magical realism in here. There's a lot about Jewish spirituality and Jewish religion, but really there's a spirituality to the religion that comes across very strongly in the story, which I found quite beautiful and quite unique, because I don't think for me, in reading historical fiction, that I've read a lot that covers Jewish culture. It's just not as prevalent in European stories as Christian culture or pagan even culture, so kind of Christian and pre-Judaism religion. It's a beautiful story about women. But there are men too, and it was interesting because each section is kind of featuring a different character, and there are chapters within each section that feature different women, and then it gets to the second part is about the men, and I thought, oh no, I don't want to read about the men. I don't want to read about the men in this town, but then I did, and that's, I think, the strength of a strong writer, is that when it's multiple narratives, you still want to read each one, and you still get something out of each one, and you still enjoy each one, and I did with this story. I do think that somehow the story felt long, even though I was very engaged with it the whole time. So I'm not sure if there was a way that it could have been edited slightly differently just to make it slightly shorter. But it was interesting because the main character, Misha, the midwife, one of the main characters, she's introduced through all the other stories, but you don't hear things from her perspective until the last section. And I almost wanted her section to be longer just because I enjoyed her perspective so much. And I think, again, I do enjoy a story where you're going over the same period of time in each section, in each character's narrative, but you are seeing it from their perspective in each narrative. And so you get this weaving of the story where there's overlap and where you don't understand something that happened in someone's story, but then you get it from the other person's perspective, and then you understand what was going on. So it really does envelop you. It wraps you up. I think you see some beautiful aspects of Jewish culture in this story. A sense of community, a sense of taking care of everyone, There's also like the gossip, and you definitely experience and understand anti-Semitism. There's workers' rights talked about in here, sex work, women's sexuality is explored in here in a very like powerful way. There's things that don't get resolved in the narrative that I thought were made it very realistic and kind of mature in that sense. Not everybody gets a happy ending. Not everybody gets the thing they most desire in their story. So yeah, it was a really fascinating story, and I think it'll stay with me. And I really admire this writer for creating something so unique and so deep. Yeah, I'm really, really glad that I read it. So that is The River Midnight by Lilian Nattel, and I will check in again with you when I have finished another book. Hi everybody. So last night, my son Elliot and I finished The Outsiders by S.E Hinton. This obviously is considered, I think, a classic, written in 1967, or published in 1967. This is S.E Hinton's story of being on the outside of society. So apparently it's set in Oklahoma, which I didn't know until I read a review by someone else. I don't remember it saying that, but I guess I was supposed to know. And there's a film called The Outsiders that I think is a very famous film from the 80s, which I have not seen yet, but I will watch now that I've read the book. And so it's the greasers versus the socias. It's about class. It's about the haves and have-nots of society, very much centered around boy culture of the time. And so a very violent and harsh reality for the greasers, who mostly live in poverty and are disenfranchised. And so it's kind of like a gang culture book. There's a lot of violence between the socias and the greasers, but what I think the main theme of the story is this idea that really everyone has their own pain, and it's just a matter of what they're dealing with and what their pain is, as opposed to it being specific to one group of people. So you have a very descriptive cast of characters. Ponyboy Curtis is our narrator, and we see everything through his perspective. His parents have died, and he lives with his two older brothers, Soda Pop and Derry, and they take care of him, and they're trying to survive. Derry was, very smart, but dropped out of school to work to support them. And Soda Pop also dropped out of school and was working, but more because he felt he just couldn't keep up in school. And so school kind of failed him. And Ponyboy is kind of the smart one, the deep thinker, the one that doesn't really aspire to this life. Like, he lives it because it's his friends and his brothers and his culture, but he kind of aspires to something beyond this life. So there's a lot that happens in here. It's quite plot heavy. And the characters are, I wouldn't say they're deeply drawn. I think that you get a sense of who they are, and it's not a long book, it's just under 200 pages, I think. So, you don't get a lot of time with the periphery characters, but you do feel a connection to them. Some of them die, some of them experience like hardships and extreme situations. And it's very much also a product of, like, you feel like you're in the 1960s when you're reading it, because of the descriptions of the clothing and the descriptions of the technology and the way life was at that time. Yeah. So I did enjoy it. I wouldn't say that I, think it's the most amazing thing. And I think this is, for me, it's interesting to compare this to something like Foxfire, which, which covers similar themes, but Foxfire is about women and The Outsiders is about men. So you're kind of getting two sides of a culture. So I would say actually that Foxfire by Joyce Carol Oates and The Outsiders would be good to read in tandem, because they really are covering a similar theme, just one from a male perspective and one from a female perspective. And I would say that Foxfire has a bit more substance to it as well. So if you liked The Outsiders and you're looking for something that goes just a little bit deeper and kind of goes beyond kind of surface value of some of these issues, then I would say read Foxfire by Joyce Carol Oates. I'm glad I've read this because it's a classic. It's part of the kind of big picture literature, American literature canon. But I did like this a bit more than The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, but I would say that it kind of falls into that category for me a little bit. My son really liked it. My son is 13 and a half, and he really enjoyed it, The Outsiders. So I think it might have an appeal to a young boy or men a little bit more than women. The women characters in here are very few and far between. I think there's literally three of them, and one of them being a terrible mom. So, not much for women to grab onto, but it certainly has I struggle to say charm, but it has a little something that I kind of understand why it's so popular, and I think it would obviously make quite a good movie. So I am interested in watching the movie and seeing if I like it. So that was The Outsiders by S.E Hinton, and I will check in again when I finish another book. Hey everybody, I just finished Burial Rites by Hannah Kent, one of my October reads, and I really enjoyed this. This was exactly what I was hoping it would be. It was very Gothic. It was very bleak. It was a slow unfolding of a mystery. So it's based on a true story of Agnes Magnusdóttir, who was the last person to be executed in Iceland in the 19th century. And she was accused of murder, the murder of two men. Her and two other people. One was a young maid who ended up having her execution stayed, and so she went to a prison where she didn't live much longer anyway. And then the other one was a man who most likely committed the murders. And so Hannah Kent learned about this story when she visited Iceland when she was young. She's from Australia, and she did a lot of research and wrote this novel as an interpretation of Agnes's life. It's a fascinating account on so many levels of, access, of the way women's lives are thrown away in so many regards, the limited options that they had in Iceland and around the world, really, in the 19th century. The bleakness of living in Iceland is very well conveyed here. The cold, the lack of fuel, so they're using like dung and peat for their fires, the cramped quarters that the peasants and the country folk lived in at the time. There's a little bit of mysticism, but not a lot, just enough to give it some atmosphere. really well-drawn characters who develop and change and evolve throughout the story. You're following a third-person narrative, and then you're following a first-person perspective from Agnes. So they're intertwined together, but Agnes is telling you her story. She's basically waiting to be executed. So we take up the story when she is brought to a farmer family, to be held until the date of her execution. And she, of course, encounters so much prejudice and disdain from people because she's a murderess. And so she has to deal with that and live with that. She's always been a servant, so she settles in quite easily to being a servant for this working with this family. Some of them like her instantly, some of them don't like her, some of them grow to appreciate her. She grew up in the valley where this family is, so she has a lot of memories, and she also has a priest. A priest is assigned to her, and she gets to pick who that person is. So she picks one from her past, and he's there to be her spiritual advisor, to help her prepare for her fate. But he also is a very sympathetic character, and you really believe that he wants what's best for her. So I found all the characters really believable. I was very invested in the story. I wanted to pick it up. I wanted to know what happened next. I thought it was so well written. So I will definitely be looking up more of Hannah Kent's work. This was her debut. Very good for a debut, I have to say. So polished. I don't think there was anything in here that shouldn't have been in here. She used a lot of records from the time and interspersed them at the beginnings of the chapters. So you got this kind of more objective look at things, but then you also went into the character of the story. I mean, to me, it's like the perfect way to learn about a historical figure through fiction. I think this is a perfect example of that. And I think it's a great read for, the spooky time of year, because it's not scary, but it's kind of gross. There's some gross parts to it. But it's also got this atmosphere, this kind of Gothic, dark atmosphere. And it's really, I think is great for a type of read that is going to get you kind of into a spooky mindset, but it's not really a scary story, but it's a dark story. And I would use the word bleak, although I found that there was warmth to the story through the relationships. So even though the subject matter is dark and this is a woman waiting to die, she experiences warmth. People warm to her, and people have empathy, and they care. And that is what takes a bleak story, or a story that is so dire in subject, and makes it still feel like a warm and like something you can endure, because these people give warmth to the story. So yeah, really enjoyed Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. And I believe it is nearing the end of October, but I believe I should get one more book finished before the end of the month. I still have 4 days, so I will check in again when I finish that one. Hey everyone, please excuse my wet hair. I just got out of the shower. Okay, so my final read for October was Becoming an Animal, An Earthly Cosmology by David Abram. This has been on my TBR for a really long time. It is a philosophy book, but also there's a spiritual element to it. I don't even know how this would be particularly categorized, but it definitely had a bit more philosophy than I was looking for. I have a kind of weird relationship with philosophical texts. My mind can wander if they get too abstract. So the reason I wanted to read this one was because it was about reconnecting with the earth. And I think that Abram has some really great points in this book about the way we have separated ourselves from the earth and how we can reclaim those things in order to, stop the destruction that humans have been doing for hundreds of years now. And also in order to feel more connection to the earth and the animals that we are a part of. So we are essentially animals, and we have elevated ourselves above them because of our consciousness, but ultimately we still need those connections to feel health and grounded and happy and all of those things. So this book came out in 2010. So there, inevitably, 14 years has changed a lot in terms of how far we've removed ourselves even more from the things, the themes that Abram was writing about in this book. But it's, the points are still valid, regardless of the fact that we've removed ourselves even more with the extremes of social media and social media addiction, removing us from that connection to the earth. One of his theories is that the written word, when we started abstracting our oral traditions and our oral stories, that is something that removed us from place. So this idea that story evolves specifically from place is obviously one that is held through many indigenous cultures, and we have removed that by taking all these stories, putting them in books. Not that books are bad, and not that sharing that knowledge is bad, but just that removing ourselves from the immediacy of nature when we're talking about it does allow us to separate ourselves to a point of not feeling the degradation inside of ourselves that is obviously happening. So where he lost me at times, what I really liked about the book, I'll start with that, was his personal storytelling about his experiences with his wife, his daughter, his homes, nature. He was a very big traveler. He did a lot of adventures all over the world. So he tells a lot of stories about that. Sometimes some of them I thought got a bit long and a bit rambly. And I just wanted things to be sometimes kept a little bit more concise. And then the waxing philosophical also at times got a bit too far out there for me. Especially I found in the conclusion, he was pulling in a whole bunch of new ideas. And I thought, why are you talking about this now? It's the conclusion. You're supposed to be wrapping things up, more concisely than this. So for me, there could have been a bit more editing done here and there to keep things more to the point. But that again is me as a reader. I struggle a little bit with philosophy. I find that people who like philosophy and philosophers like to go there. They like to take it down the road. And for me, I'm just like, please don't go that far because you're just losing me now. So I really liked, there's a quote that he put right at the beginning of the book, which I thought was beautiful. It said, voice, the breath's tooth, thought, the brain's bone, birdsong, an extension of the beak, speech, the antler of the mind. And that was by Robert Bringhurst. So I really loved that. And we'll definitely write that down somewhere so I can think about it more. So that's Becoming Animal. I mean, if you like philosophy, environmentalism, spirituality, then, definitely check this out. I think for me, this is the furthest into philosophy that I can go. And even then, as I said, I think it went a little bit further than I like to go on that thought train. So, glad I read it. And that is the end of my reading for October 2024. And I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.